This is the third part of my talk, and I continue with large groups legacies. The chosen glory, chosen trauma, identity tent, and collapse of time, and separately poverty. Chosen glory, chosen trauma, identity tent, and collapse of time are concepts developed by Vamik Volkan, one of my teachers. And they are very helpful in understanding whole series of historical, social, political, and psychological events, both collective and individual, and spread over many centuries. Vamik Volkan is now 93. He is of Turkish Cypriot origin, living in the US, emeritus professor of psychiatry, psychoanalyst, chairman of the American Psychiatrists Association's Committee on Psychiatry and Foreign Affairs, founder of the Center for the Study of Mind and Human Interaction, who developed a theoretical and field-proven base of knowledge on ethnic tension, racism, large group identity, terrorism, societal trauma, immigration, mourning, transgenerational transmissions, leader-follower relationships, and more. His center has been involved in many decisive diplomatic talks on highest political levels, often contributing to the mitigation of severe conflicts. Just an example, in 1987, the Soviet Duma asked the center to examine existing difficulties between the Soviet Union and the United States. After the fall of Soviet Union, the center members worked in the Baltic republics, in Albania, former Yugoslavia, Georgia, South Ossetia, as also in Turkey and Greece, and in Israel and Arab countries. Vamik Volkan wrote more than 40 books, translated in many languages, and hundreds of articles, and he was proposed for the Nobel Prize for Peace. Chosen glory and chosen trauma. These are conceptual tools for understanding how large groups operate across generations to maintain their identity rooted in cultural values, norms, and in the collective past. Okay. So I'll give you examples of chosen glory. And these are victories in battles and achievements which nations keep in their consciousness as moments of glory and which have shaped their collective identity. Old cultures, the Greeks, ancient Greeks, their history, their contribution to the Western philosophy. Indians, with their ancient culture and spiritual tradition. Chinese, their ancient history and cultural achievements. France, the French Revolution and Napoleon's victories. British conquest all over the world. Portuguese, who see themselves as the father of Brazil. Russians, their victory over the Nazis. Romanians have a rich history of victories against the Ottoman Empire. Mircea the Elder, Stefan the Great, Mihail the Brave. They form an important part of Romanian national identity. And I can give examples on and on and on, but I think you get the idea. Chosen trauma is a catastrophic loss or a humiliation that become central to a group's identity and a symbol of ongoing group's suffering. And it is chosen because a group consciously or unconsciously adopts this traumatic event as a defining part of its identity. The chosen trauma fosters a sense of shared victimhood, injustice, and unresolved grief, binding members through a collective, injured self-image, which is not allowed to be forgotten and has to be rectified. And I'll give you examples. The Battle of Kosovo, I'll tell you more about it. And the Armenian Holocaust, the final dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, 1908 to 1922, which Turks perceive as a trauma, the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 for the Germans, and their defeat in the Second World War, the Jewish Holocaust, and the last surfaced chosen trauma, which I find interesting, was during World War II, the Volhynia massacre, in which Ukrainian armed groups brutally murdered 100,000 Poles. The peak of the massacre took place in 1943. These killings were exceptionally brutal, and most of the victims were women and children. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, Poles have received with open arms more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees. Yet, since the Ukrainian refugees demand Polish citizenship, their acceptance by the Poles has plummeted, and the collective memory of the Volhynia massacre has surfaced, which fuels the rejection of Ukrainians by Poles. This is how chosen trauma works. It can resurface if the circumstances allow it. Vamik Volkan uses for the large group psychology the metaphor of a canvas tent, and I have already presented to you this metaphor, emphasizing then identity, while now I'll focus on the large group identity. The canvas of the tent covers all members like a second layer of clothes, offering belonging, protection, and, most and foremost, identity. The pole of the tent, which keeps the tent upright, preventing it to collapse, is a collective identity. Identity is crucial in understanding large group psychology. It is a glue which keeps the members of the tribe together, a most potent glue. Have you ever wondered why people get so emotional, cheering or swearing at the end of a match, soccer, cricket? Well, because of activated collective identity, tribal identity. The fans of a soccer team form a tribe. Did the Troubles in Ireland, which lasted for the last 40 years of the last century, leaving thousands dead, of which 52% were civilians, did they intrigue you? All Irish, sharing the same language and the same territory, yet fighting bitterly, the discontent having its roots hundreds of years prior to this calamitous violence, because of tribal identity of two religious and political groups. The tribal identity, as already stated, is not a monolith. It is a complex composite. Ireland is a tent. Protestants and loyalists form a tent. Catholics and nationalists form a tent, both inside the Irish tent. This is collective identity, group identity. I can give you two examples from my own experience about the loyalty to the large group. This tent. In 1985, I went on a short holiday to Romania with my then Dutch boyfriend. It was his first and last visit to Romania. Romania was then at the peak of Ceausescu's dictatorship. And I do not exaggerate when I say that Ceausescu had transformed the whole country into a huge concentration camp. So much so that twice a year, when I had to travel to Romania to visit my parents still living there, I was so scared of the sinister atmosphere I will encounter there that I decided to cancel the trip. The decision relaxed me and made it possible to take the flight. To friends in Germany, I was living at that time in Germany, I was telling that I have a round trip to hell. Coming back from our holiday, my then boyfriend and I went to our local pub to meet friends. My then boyfriend started to tell about his experience in Romania. Everything he told was truthful, yet I felt deeply hurt. I left the pub in rage and tears and drank home 3/2 of a bottle with Tsuika, a strong Romanian alcohol which we had brought from Bucharest. What happened was that his recount of the misery, poverty, fear, rudeness he saw in Romania equaled throwing stones on the canvas of my large group identity tent, something which I did not take kindly. The second example was the Romanian Revolution in December 1989, which overthrew Ceausescu's dictatorship. I did not have a TV, yet friends told me that political unrest is happening in Romania, so I went to their place to see the news. Well, seeing the images on the TV, I started to hyperventilate. 2 days later, I flew with the Dutch Red Cross to Bucharest with a team of medical doctors who were sent to help the Romanian healthcare to cope with the medical emergencies due to the erupted violence. I had convinced the Dutch Red Cross to accept me as a translator. The events had awakened my loyalty to my country of birth, made me disregard the danger and find a very fast way to return to the country. I reiterate because I find it important. If someone slings mud or throws stones at the tent or shakes the tent and its central pole are threatened. And the biggest threat we can experience is a threat to our identity. And a threat to our collective identity is a worse. Related to identity, the lesson of history is, according to me, this. Without being part of a collective identity, we are lost. Being part of a collective identity, we are confined. If we want not to get lost, if we want freedom instead of confinement, We have to expand our collective consciousness beyond our narrow national, ethnic, religious identity. We have to clear social structures of the victim-perpetrator dynamic, which for centuries dominates the legacy one generation leaves to the next. I'll go now into the historical perspective. In the title, it is Transgenerational Legacies from Historical, Psychological, and Spiritual Perspective. And I mentioned already some things about from the historical perspective, and now I'll go deeper into it. So, concept of Vamik Volkan, which I find very interesting and valuable, is his concept of time collapse. And this is when past and present merge and reality shifts. And I'll give you 3 examples what he means by it, by time collapse. So, time collapse. I'll give you a number of examples, and the first one is about Kosovo, and the second is about Bosnia, and both belong to the former Yugoslavia. Kosovo. Until the 14th century, Serbia was a mighty empire. On June 28, 1389, the Serbian Christian Orthodox Prince Lazar clashed at Kosovo-Polje with the army of the Muslim Turkish Sultan Muran I. Prince Lazar lost the battle, and Serbia became a part of the Ottoman Empire for the next 500 years. Kosovo remained under Ottoman occupation until 1913. The liberation of Kosovo made the Serbs euphoric. A witness describes, "The single sound of that word, Kosovo, caused an indescribable excitement. This one word pointed back to the black past, 5 centuries. In it exists the whole of our sad past, the tragedy of Prince Lazar and the entire Serbian people. Each of us created for himself a picture of Kosovo while we were still in the cradle. Our mothers lulled us to sleep with the songs of Kosovo, and in our schools our teachers never ceased in their stories of Lazar." On 4 May 1980, Josip Broz Tito died. Catholic Croats, Orthodox Serbs, Bosnian Slavic Muslims, and Kosovo Albanian Muslims picked up their grievances, desires for revenge, and drives for power buried for 35 years, since 1945, under a common communist ideology, which succeeded to create only a shallow semblance of unity. Fast forward 7 years, in 1987, Slobodan Milosevic, the head of the Serbian Communist Party, attended a big meeting of the Communist Party in Kosovo. Kosovo's population was 90% Albanian Muslims and 10% Serbs. The participants at the meeting were Albanian Muslim Party members. Yet during the meeting, a crowd of Serbs forced its way into the meeting hall to talk to Milosevic, and Milosevic let them in. For 13 hours until dawn, Milosevic listened to their grievances about the hardships they were enduring at the hand of the Albanian Muslims. At the end of the gathering, Milosevic was transformed from a communist bureaucrat to a Serbian nationalist.
Odsustvo te solidarnosti za beskrajnu patnju Srba i Crnogoraca na Kosovu nezalečiva je rana na njihovom srcu kao i na srcu cele Srbije. Ali nije vreme za tugu, već za borbu. Ta svest je osvajala Srbiju ovog leta i ta svest je postala materijalna snaga koja će zaustaviti teror na Kosovu i koja će ujediniti Srbiju. To je proces koji ne može da zaustavi više nikakva sila pred kojom je slab svaki strah. Ljudi će pristati da žive i sa siromaštvom, ali neće pristati da žive bez slobode. Bar ovi ljudi ovdje okupljeni i ljudi u Srbiji kojima i sam pripadam i zato znam da mogu da žive samo u slobodi i nikako drugačije. A da bitku za slobodu ovaj narod dobija, to znaju i turski i nemački osvajači. U oba svjetska rata smo ušli goli i bosi sa uverenjem da se borimo za pravdu i oba rata Kosovo poveo je narod, svi građani, bez obzira na nacionalnost i profesiju. A nema bitke na svetu koju je narod izgubio od pamćenja. Svaki narod ima onu ljubav
Years later, in 1989, the 600th anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo from 1389 was approaching. In June 1989, on Milosevic's order, Prince Lazar's body was placed in a coffin and taken on tour to every town and village in Serbia, where it was received by big assemblies of Serbs dressed in black, who sobbed, cried, and gave speeches. On June 28, 1989, a helicopter brought Milosevic to Kosovo Polje. He took the podium and with his speech brought the crowd in a frenzy. The message of the speech was, never again would Islam subjugate the Serbs. For each and every Serb, it seemed that the Battle of Kosovo had happened not 600 years before, but one day before, yesterday. This is called time collapse. And in 1998, a war between Serbs and Albanian Muslims broke out in Kosovo. The war lasted 1 year and was very bloody. Around 13,000 people died, and 1.4 million Muslim Albanians were displaced by the Serbs. NATO intervened, and the Serbs had to withdraw. Until today, Kosovo does not belong to Serbia. If a new Balkan war breaks out, and Balkan is a volatile place, it will surely engulf Kosovo anew, as the Serbian Republic will fight to regain control over it. Bosnia. In 1991, the American journalist Roy Goodman visited Bosnia. When talking to a major in the Serb army, Milan Milutinovic about the rape of Muslim Bosnian men and women by Bosnian Serbs, Milutinovic referred as explanation to the Janissaries. Janissaries were the most beautiful and intelligent young men among the Serbian population, and they were forcefully taken away from their families, circumcised and made slaves by the Turks. The practice, called devshirme, lasted for a couple of centuries. For the Serbs, this is a historical trauma, a rape of their soul. Thus the Serbs felt entitled to take revenge. Goodman was confused and asked, quote, "Which century are you talking about?" End quote. Milutinovic replied, quote, "We do to them what they did to us." End quote. For Goodman, Milutinovic's explanation was, quote, "the most bizarre I ever heard from a military man." End quote. Yet for Milutinovic and all the Serb population, it made perfect sense. Time for them had collapsed. A summary of the Yugoslav War, just to give you an idea of the enormity of it. It lasted for 10 years in the middle of Europe. And Kosovo and Bosnia were only a part of it. And the whole war has cost the lives of 140,000 people. 4.4 million people were displaced. 2.4 million were refugees in other countries, and 2 million were displaced internally. The roots of the different wars inside the overarching Yugoslav war were in the history of the belligerent parties for whom the time had collapsed. One last example of time collapse. The long walk of the Navajo people. In 1864, U.S. soldiers under the direction of Kit Carson burned the properties of 8,000 Navajo Indians who were then forced on a 100 miles march to a fort where they were imprisoned for 4 years. During the march and imprisonment, 2,500 of them died. The march is known as the Long Walk. In 1992, in U.S., Harold Baer, a pastor from Virginia, was involved in a project with Navajo Indians. Harold Baer recounts, quote, "The Navajo were telling me about the long walk, and at first I thought they were talking about something that had happened the day before. I was really taken aback when I realized they were talking about something that had happened more than 125 years ago." End quote. I leave now Vamik Volkan, and I would like to address another aspect of large groups' legacies, which I think is very important, and this is poverty. So, being born in a poor neighborhood, in a poor family, is also a transgenerational legacy concerning large groups of people living in slums, favelas, impoverished neighborhoods, and countries affected over long periods of time with economic scarcity. Research has shown that people born in poverty have a lower life expectancy, are more often sick, suffer more of chronic illnesses, are more prone to addiction, are confronted with more community and domestic violence, And the reasons why it is difficult to raise out of poverty are also mapped, and I'll tell you about them. And poverty is also transmitted from one generation to the next. So the disadvantages of poverty, I'll tell you the different aspects of it. 1. Educational disadvantages concerning communities of adults and children. Communities living in poverty are less educated, have weaker social support networks, less access to social networks which can help with upward mobility, have less influent connections, the parents can less stimulate their children intellectually, have less financial means for investment in children's education, and the schools in poor neighborhoods are often underfunded and the teachers are often less bright. 2. Nutritional disadvantages concerning adults and children. Poor nutrition during children's growing years leads to physical and intellectual deficits, which in later years hinder well-paid work and thus economic prosperity. Adults develop cardiometabolic diseases due to lack of knowledge about healthy nutrition and healthy lifestyle. 3. Stressful environment. Poverty leads to stress. Chronic stress leads more easily to neighborhood and domestic violence. Violence leads more easily to addiction and more generally to mental health problems. 4. Psychological challenges. Growing up in poverty, in an environment in which stress is prevalent with stressed parents and family members, leads to pervasive low self-esteem and lack of self-confidence. This undermines the development of talents and impairs social and professional success. Now, this being said, it does not mean that nobody ever rises out of poverty, excels in one endeavor or the other, becoming successful economically, socially, and fulfilled as a person. There are many examples for this scenario, yet these are the heroes. At the same time, it does not mean that in affluent neighborhood and families there are no chronic illnesses, no domestic violence, no addictions, and no adults who fail socially, professionally, and personally. They exist in high numbers, yet statistically much less than in impoverished households and neighborhoods. So far about poverty. And with this I end the chapter of large groups legacies. And the next big chapter will be the legacies of families.